I was 48 years old and 300 feet underwater off the coast of Cape Canaveral when my salvage rig snagged on a secret the government had buried for half a century. What I found wasn't a Spanish galleon or a lost shipping container. This was American, impossibly old, and wedged deep in the coral reef was a small, crazed quartz window staring back at me from the gloom. It felt less like a discovery and more like disturbing a grave. When the Coast Guard divers finally arrived and their lights hit the object my cable was attached to, one of them just whispered over the radio, "Oh my God, that's not possible." Tell me, if you found something like that, something that felt like a tomb sealed shut for decades, would you have dared to touch it? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, hit subscribe and tell us what city or country you're watching from. You won't believe what happened next. My name is Caleb Vance. I'm 48 years old, and for the better part of 30 of those years, the salt-laced air off the coast of Cape Canaveral has been the first thing I breathe in the morning and the last thing I taste at night. My world is the deck of the Sea Serpent, my aging but reliable salvage boat, and the deep, silent expanse of the Atlantic that she calls home. I'm not a treasure hunter in the romantic sense of the word. I don't chase pirate maps. I'm a glorified junkman, a deep-sea custodian. I pull up lost cargo, clear fouled shipping lanes, and occasionally, if I'm lucky, I find a piece of history that pays the bills for another year. Most days are a familiar rhythm of engine hum, sonar pings, and the groan of the winch. I know these waters. I know the way the Gulf Stream pulls, the way the sand shifts after a hurricane, and the places where old wrecks lie like sleeping giants. Or at least, I thought I did. That Tuesday started with a sky the color of a faded postcard, a pale, hazy blue that promised a long, hot day. The sea was as flat as a sheet of glass, and the Cape was a low green smudge on the horizon, dotted by the skeletal launch towers that had long ago become part of the landscape. I was sipping lukewarm coffee, my eyes on the deep scan sonar, chasing a whisper. An old fisherman, a guy named George Peterson, had told me a story over beers about his grandfather seeing a Spanish galleon go down in a squall somewhere out here, back before the turn of the century. It was a long shot, the kind of story that keeps guys like me burning fuel, but you never know. That's the siren song of this business. You never know what the ocean is hiding just beyond your sight. The sonar pinged its steady, hypnotic beat, painting a picture of the seabed 300 feet below. Sand, reef, more sand. The usual. I was about to mark the area as another dead end when it happened. It wasn't a sudden jolt. It was a deep, resonant northern raz that vibrated up the winch cable, through the deck, and into the soles of my boots. Then, a grinding sound. A heavy, metallic shearing that was completely alien to this environment. It wasn't the sharp crack of snagging on a coral head, or the soft, dragging pull of a net buried in sand. This was the sound of stressed steel. The winch motor screamed in protest, and I cut the power immediately. The Sea Serpent listed slightly, tethered to something immense, something unmovable on the ocean floor. My heart rate kicked up a notch. This was the moment in my job where things could go from routine to deadly in a heartbeat. A fouled cable could capsize a boat my size if the current shifted. My first thought was military scrap. We're in the shadow of the Air Force and NASA here, after all. The ocean floor is littered with their forgotten toys, spent rocket stages, drone targets, even entire jet engines. I've pulled up enough of it to know the feel. But this was different. I eased the boat forward, trying to get some slack, but the line stayed taut. Whatever my rig was caught on, it was wedged in tight. I turned my attention back to the sonar screen, running the deep scan again, focusing on the coordinates of the snag. The image that slowly resolved on the screen made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't a jagged piece of debris, it was a shape. Deliberate. Symmetrical. A smooth, conical form, like a giant tooth, half buried in a notorious coral formation we call the Devil's Jawbone. It was about 12 feet long, maybe 10 feet wide at its base. Too big for a weather buoy, the wrong shape for a shipping container. A strange feeling began to creep over me, a cold prickle of unease that had nothing to do with the risk to my boat. The sun was beating down, but I felt a chill. The rhythmic ping of the sonar suddenly sounded like a ticking clock. The silence of the open ocean felt heavier, more profound. I spent the next hour trying every trick I knew to free the cable. I circled the spot, changed the angle of the pull, let out slack, and tried to snap it free. Nothing. The object below held my boat with an indifferent, absolute strength. It was like being anchored to a mountain. The initial annoyance of a snagged line was slowly morphing into something else. A deep, gnawing curiosity mixed with a primal sense of dread. It felt less like I had found something, and more like something had found me. It was holding me there for a reason. I've been in strange situations before. I once found a Volkswagen Beetle perfectly preserved at 200 feet. Another time, a grand piano. But this felt different. This felt significant. The shape on the sonar was just too clean, too purposeful. It didn't belong there. It was an intrusion, a piece of a puzzle from a completely different box. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the water, I knew I was at a crossroads. I could cut the cable, lose thousands of dollars in gear, and sail away, pretending I never saw that impossible shape on the screen. Or, I could acknowledge the warning bells going off in my head and accept that this was far beyond my pay grade. What would you have done? Faced with a mystery locked 300 feet in the dark, a secret the ocean has held for who knows how long, would you have dared to investigate further? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button and tell us what city or country you're watching from. Because making that decision was only the beginning. It didn't take long. When you use the Coast Guard's emergency channel and mention a possible submerged hazard in a high-traffic shipping lane near a naval base, they tend to show up promptly. The familiar white and orange of the cutter Vigilant appeared on the horizon within 2 hours, slicing through the water with an efficiency that always impressed me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This was their problem now. I'd have to file a claim for my snagged rig, but that was better than losing my boat or stumbling into something I couldn't handle. But the relief was short-lived. Trailing in the Vigilante's wake was another vessel. It was long, sleek, and painted a flat, non-reflective gray. There were no markings, no flags, nothing to identify it. As it drew closer, I could see men on its deck. They weren't in Coast Guard uniforms. They wore simple black polo shirts and tactical pants. Their faces were grim, their posture rigid. They looked like they belonged in a government building in D.C., not on the open water off of Florida. My radio crackled to life. It was the captain of the Stuffed-in Vigilance Stuffed-in Visiabos, a man I knew casually named Mark Olson. His voice was all business. "Caleb, this is Captain Olson. Stand by. We have a special team taking lead on this one. Just follow our instructions." A special team. My stomach tightened. You don't call in a special team for a piece of weather equipment or a lost shipping container. The gray boat pulled alongside the Vigilant, and the men in black transferred over with practiced, silent speed. They didn't even look at me or my little boat. It was as if the sea serpent and I were just part of the scenery, an inconvenient detail in a much larger picture. I watched as 2 of their divers began to suit up. Their gear was unlike anything I'd ever seen up close. Not standard commercial or even military-grade scuba. They were using closed-circuit rebreathers that produced no bubbles, and their dive helmets looked like something out of a science fiction movie, bristling with antennas and high-intensity lights. They were preparing to go into the deep with the kind of equipment you use when you expect trouble. The lead agent, a tall man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to analyze everything, finally acknowledged my existence. He and Captain Olson motored over to the Sea Serpent in a small, inflatable raft. The agent didn't bother with introductions. He just looked at my sonar screen, at the coordinates I had marked. "You're Caleb Vance," he stated, not asked. "You found the anomaly. Did you touch it?" I shook my head. "Just my winch cable. It snagged hard." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning my boat, my gear, me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "You will remain here. You will not communicate with anyone on any channel. You will monitor our operational frequency. Is that understood?" I just nodded. There was an authority in his voice that left no room for argument. This wasn't a request. Their divers went over the side with a quiet splash, their forms disappearing instantly into the blue depths. The sun was getting low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but the atmosphere on the water was cold and sterile. On the deck of the Night Vigilant, a bank of monitors had been set up, showing video feeds from the divers' helmets. I was too far away to see the details, but I could hear the radio transmissions they were patching through to a loudspeaker. The chatter was clipped, professional, and full of jargon. Descending past 200 feet, visibility 10 meters. Approaching target coordinates. I have a visual on the salvage cable. Confirming contact. The object is partially buried. Significant coral incrustation. Then, a long silence. The kind of silence that stretches your nerves thin. The men on the deck of the cutter stood motionless, their eyes glued to the screens. The silver-haired agent stood with his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves against my hull and the hum of the cutter's generators. Finally, a voice crackled over the speaker, strained, breathless. "Command, you need to see this. The heat shield is heavily scarred, consistent with atmospheric re-entry. We are at the primary hatch." More silence. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of the divers breathing over the open channel. Then, a different sound. A high-pitched, hydraulic whine. They were using a tool, a spreader, trying to force the hatch. It was a horrible, grating sound, like a tomb being desecrated. It went on for what felt like an eternity. Then, a loud, metallic pop time echoed through the radio, followed by a hiss of escaping gas. They had breached it. The deck of the cutter was utterly silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Then, the first diver spoke, and his voice was no longer the calm, collected tone of a professional. It was tight with panic. "We have contents," he stammered. "It's not empty. Repeat, the capsule is not empty." A shockwave of activity erupted on the cutter. Orders were being barked, but quietly, urgently. The silver-haired agent never took his eyes off the monitors. He spoke into a small radio clipped to his shirt, his voice too low for me to hear. A few minutes later, he and Captain Olson were back in the raft, heading towards me. This time, the agent was carrying a ruggedized tablet. He stepped onto my deck, and the air around me felt 10 degrees colder. He didn't say a word, just swiped the screen and turned it to face me. On it was a scanned document, stamped with "Top Secret" in bold red letters. It was a mission file. The title was Project Chimera, Apollo 18A. My blood ran cold. Apollo 18. That mission never flew. Everyone knew that. Apollo 17 was the last one. The agent pointed a finger at a line of text. Mission status: catastrophic failure on launch pad. Crew lost. I looked from the tablet, back to his cold, empty eyes. "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I saw it myself. The heat shield is burned from re-entry. It came back from somewhere. It didn't blow up on a launch pad in Florida." He gave the slightest of nods, a flicker of confirmation in his otherwise stoic expression. "The official record is often incomplete," he said softly. He took the tablet back, and the screen went dark. The mystery wasn't just that I had found a lost piece of space history. The mystery was that I had found something that, according to the United States government, should not exist. A ghost from a mission that was never supposed to have left the ground. What do you do when you're shown proof that history is a lie? Would you have the courage to question it, to pull at that thread? Let me know what you'd do in the comments below. And if you want to hear what they found inside that capsule, make sure you subscribe, because the truth was more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. The silver-haired agent pocketed his tablet, and the screen showing the mission that never was disappeared, but the image was burned into my mind. Apollo 18A. Catastrophic failure. Crew lost. He stared at me, his eyes giving nothing away, but I could feel the question hanging in the air between us. If the crew was lost on the launch pad, then who or what was inside that capsule at the bottom of the ocean? He didn't need to say another word. He just turned and got back into the raft, leaving me alone on the deck of the Sea Serpent, a prisoner on my own boat, tethered to a secret that was rewriting history right before my eyes. The radio silence from the divers was broken by a direct order from the agent, his voice now amplified across the water, sharp and cold. Diver 1, report status of contents. Visual confirmation required. There was a pause, filled only by the sound of ragged breathing from the diver below. Then, his voice came back, shaky but controlled. Command, the interior is compromised. There's no crew. Repeat, there are no human remains. A collective, silent exhalation seemed to pass through the men on the cutter. No bodies. I felt a strange mix of relief and an even deeper dread. If the astronauts weren't in there, where were they? And what did he mean by compromised? The agent looked over at me, then gestured to Captain Olson. A moment later, a technician on the cutter turned one of the monitors to face my boat. The image was grainy, distorted by the 300 feet of water between us, but it was clear enough. It was the helmet cam feed from the first diver. I was looking through his eyes, into the cramped, dark interior of the Apollo capsule. The beam of his light cut through the blackness, illuminating the 3 couches where the astronauts would have been strapped in for their violent ride back to Earth. The harnesses were unbuckled, lying neatly on the seats. The control panel was a mess of dials and switches, just as it should be. But everything was covered in a thin, crystalline frost. It wasn't ice. It refracted the diver's light in strange geometric patterns, shimmering with colors that didn't seem natural. It grew in delicate fractal patterns across the instrument panels, over the seats, and across the small quartz window. The diver's light panned across the cabin. "There's no sign of a struggle," he reported, his voice tight. "No damage to the interior, aside from this growth. It's everywhere." He reached out a gloved hand and touched one of the crystals. It flaked away like brittle sugar glass. "It's not frozen. Temperature in here is consistent with the ambient water temp." The camera moved lower, towards the floor of the module, where the geological sample containers were supposed to be stored. 2 of the containers were sealed, their latches firmly in place, but the third one, the primary sample box, was different. It was slightly ajar, not forced open from the outside, but bulged, as if something had pushed its way out from the inside. The crystalline growth was thickest around this box, radiating outwards from the broken seal like a frozen shockwave. The silver-haired agent's voice cut through the tension. "Diver 2, do not touch anything. Document the primary sample container. I want high-resolution images of the breach." He was no longer just an investigator, he was a containment specialist. He knew something about this. This wasn't a surprise to him. It was a confirmation of a fear. He turned and spoke into his private radio, his voice low and urgent. "Initiate Protocol Chimera. We have a containment breach. I repeat, Chimera is active." On the deck of the cutter, the men in black moved with a new, terrifying purpose. They weren't just securing a piece of history anymore. They were handling a potential biohazard. The historical and scientific implications were staggering, and they were unfolding right in front of me. Apollo 18A wasn't a myth. It was a real, clandestine mission. The official story of a launch pad failure was a lie, a cover story crafted to bury something. They sent 3 men to the moon, and this capsule came back, but the men did not. Instead, it brought back something else. Something that could grow in the cold, crushing dark of the abyss. Something that could break its way out of a reinforced containment box. The questions hammered at me. What happened to the crew? Did they open that box in transit? Did this growth do something to them? Or did they simply vanish, leaving this alien passenger to finish the journey home alone? Within the hour, the entire operation changed. A massive salvage barge, the kind the Navy uses for submarine recovery, appeared on the horizon, escorted by 2 more sleek, gray boats. A crane, big enough to lift a locomotive, was being prepped on its deck. The divers were ordered out of the water and immediately placed into a portable decontamination tent set up on the Vigilant, Tours 1 tolls. They were stripping them of their gear, spraying them down. It was a scene straight out of a pandemic movie. My little salvage operation had stumbled into a 50-year-old quarantine. They weren't recovering a capsule, they were recovering Pandora's box. They never let me get a closer look. The military crane lifted the entire capsule from the sea in one smooth, powerful motion. Water streamed from the breached hatch as it rose into the evening air, the strange crystals on its hull glittering under the floodlights before it was quickly lowered onto the barge and covered by a thick, black tarp. The men in black swarmed over it, securing it with heavy chains. My winch cable, the thing that started this whole mess, was unceremoniously cut and dropped back into the sea. The agent came over one last time. He handed me a clipboard with a single document on it, a non-disclosure agreement. It was thick with legal jargon, but the message was simple. I had seen nothing. I had found a detached sonar buoy. My snagged equipment would be replaced, my time compensated. If I ever spoke a word of what I really saw, the capsule, the mission file, the crystals, I would be charged with violating the National Security Act, treason. He looked me in the eye as I signed it. "The case is closed, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice flat. "A piece of forgotten Cold War history is now secure. You did your civic duty." But I saw it in his eyes. This case wasn't closed. They hadn't found what they were looking for. Or maybe they had, and it terrified them. They buried the truth once in 1973, and now they were burying it again. But the ocean doesn't keep secrets forever. It spits them back up. They took the capsule, but they left the questions with me, festering in the dark. They thought they were closing a book, but for me, they had just ripped out the first page of a story I now had to finish. Would you have the courage to pull on that thread, to risk everything, to find out what was really in that box? Let me know your thoughts down below. And if you want to hear about the clues they left behind, the ones that told me where to look next, make sure you subscribe, because my search for the truth was just beginning. They left me there in the encroaching darkness, the wake from their armada of secrets slapping against the hull of the sea serpent. I watched until the barge carrying the shrouded capsule was just a dark shape against the dying light, a hearse sailing into the night. Then the gray boats, and finally, the Coast Guard cutter, all vanished over the horizon, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of my engine and the deafening roar of my own thoughts. The non-disclosure agreement sat on my navigation table, its stark black print feeling heavier than any anchor I'd ever lifted. Officially, I found a weather buoy. My compensation for the lost gear and my civic duty arrived a week later. A certified check for an amount that was just a little too generous, and a brand new top-of-the-line winch cable, delivered by a logistics company I'd never heard of. They were trying to buy my silence, to scrub the memory clean with money and equipment. But you can't pay a man to forget the impossible. The case was closed, they said. But for me, it had been pried wide open. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The conical shape on my sonar. The scarred heat shield, materializing out of the gloom. The diver's panicked voice crackling over the radio. The capsule is not empty. And then, the chilling contradiction. There are no human remains. I'd lie in my bunk, the gentle rocking of the boat that had soothed me my whole life now feeling like a cage. and I'd whisper the words to myself. Apollo 18A. Project Chimera. What was Chimera? In mythology, it was a monster made of disparate parts. What kind of monster had they found or created? The government story was a house of cards built on a lie. A launch pad failure is violent, explosive. It doesn't create a capsule capable of surviving re-entry from lunar orbit. The two stories couldn't both be true. One was the performance for the public. The other was the terrifying reality they had buried at sea. My life, once defined by the simple physics of pressure and buoyancy, was now consumed by a single crushing question. What was in that box? I started digging, quietly. Late at night, using encrypted connections at public libraries, I became a different kind of scavenger. I wasn't looking for gold or historical artifacts anymore. I was hunting for ghosts in the machine of public records. I searched for the astronauts assigned to the canceled Apollo missions. The official records for the crew of Apollo 18 were public knowledge. They were reassigned to other programs, but I wasn't looking for them. I was looking for the crew of 18A, the men from the file. Nothing. It was like they had never existed. Their names, their service records, their entire lives had been digitally incinerated, leaving behind nothing but redacted files and dead-end links. I found one fragmented document, a declassified communications log from a tracking station from the early 70s. It mentioned anomalous telemetry from an unscheduled orbital object on a trajectory from the moon. The entry was dated 3 days after the supposed launch pad failure of Apollo 18. The rest of the page was blacked out. They had been so thorough in their cleanup, so professional, but they made one mistake. They were military men, government agents. They weren't salvage guys. They didn't think like me. They had cut my winch cable, my expensive reinforced steel cable, and let it fall back into the abyss. The day after they left, I went back. The coordinates were burned into my memory. I spent 12 hours dragging the bottom until my magnet snagged it. I pulled up the severed end of my own cable. Back in my workshop, under the harsh glare of a magnifying lamp, I saw it. Embedded deep within the twisted steel strands, where the cable had been ground against the capsule's hull, were tiny, almost microscopic fragments. They weren't metal shavings. They weren't flecks of paint or pieces of coral. They were crystalline. Under the light, they refracted a strange, oily spectrum of colors, just like the growth I'd seen on the diver's helmet cam. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally so. I had a piece of it, a piece of the secret. They took the capsule, but they left the contamination behind. They thought they were burying a 50-year-old secret, but I think they were just moving a tombstone. That thing didn't come back empty. The crew may have died on the launch pad, just like the official story says. But the mission didn't end there. Something else took their place. Something that could survive the vacuum of space. Something that could pilot a command module through the fury of re-entry. Something that grew in the cold and the dark. They didn't find the remains of a lost crew. They found the vessel of a new arrival. And after 50 years of silence on the ocean floor, we disturbed it. We opened the door. And as I sit here tonight, looking out at the dark water, holding this tiny, cold crystal in my hand, I have to wonder if they truly managed to put it back in the box. Or if the real quarantine has only just begun. What do you think was really behind it all? What did that mission bring back from the moon that was so terrifying it had to be erased from history? Let me know your theories in the comments. And if you want to find out what I discover from this tiny, impossible clue, make sure you subscribe and join me on this search for the truth. Because I'm not letting this go. The ocean showed me a secret, and I'm going to follow it no matter how deep it goes.